Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sustainable Energy Hawaii's webinar series on geothermal energy. My name is Noel Marin. I'm a board member of Sustainable Energy Hawaii, or SEH, and I am your moderator as well as your Zoom host today. SEH is focused on enabling affordable renewable energy for Hawaii Island. We support solutions that balance economic, environmental, and equity concerns. And in this series, we hope to improve our awareness and knowledge of our geothermal resources. Once again, this is a journey of discovery. We're here to learn about this topic from many angles. And while this topic is controversial, our hope is that with this series, we'll have a better understanding of geothermal energy and how it might be leveraged in a manner that is meaningful as well as acceptable. A couple of weeks ago, we covered the reasons for our exploration and the science and technology involved in geothermal energy research and development. Today, we will cover concerns as well as obstacles, and importantly, what might be needed to address them. I will share our program slide with you now. So this is our panel. We have a number of individuals who have taken their Saturday morning to be with us today. I applaud them for doing that. So we have Henry Curtis with Ililani Media. We have Patrick Kahawaiola of Keokaha Community Association. We have Desmon Haumea, SEH board member. Kalaniakea Wilson of the Sovereign Council of Hawaiian Homestead Associations, Mike Kaleikini of Puna Geothermal Venture, Ormat, and finally, Doug Adams, Director of Hawaii County Research and Development. So with that, let's begin with Henry Curtis. Henry has a BA in economics and completed coursework towards an MA from Queens College, City University of New York. He has represented Life of the Land in more than 50 gas and electric regulatory proceedings since 1996. He's also a journalist with Ililani Media, a digital media platform, since 2011. Henry was appointed by Governor Ige to the Powering Past Coal Task Force in 2021. Henry?
Thank you, Noel. Mahalo to the Sustainable Energy Hawaii for organizing this series on geothermal. The first set of presentations were on February 5th, and I did not find anything in that presentation that was factually wrong. Life of Land agrees with Rep. Lowen that it's all about location, location, location. Life of Land does not oppose geothermal, but believes there are major flaws in the current PGV contract. And if geothermal is expanded within Hawaii, it should be done outside of Puna. Geothermal, when done right, is a low greenhouse gas emitting renewable energy that is a firm power source. At the February 5th meeting, Dr. Nicole Lautzi introduced play fairway analysis, which was developed first for petroleum resources and then expanded to geothermal. And it sought to ask, where are the resources located and where are access points on the surface that you can acquire them? And then what are the constraints that would limit where you would put it? And the constraints used in the paper forced the answer to be Puna. So it wasn't that the other options weren't available, but just the artificial constraints used made Puna the right choice. Lifeland will argue that Puna is not the right choice, even if you exclude environmental issues and you exclude cultural issues. First, there was a comparison of Puna Geothermal Venture to New Zealand and saying, well, if New Zealand does it, why can't we do it? Well, the Puna Geothermal Venture plant on Hawaii Island represents about 1/6 of the power on the island. Whereas if you picked it up and moved it to New Zealand, it would represent 0.4% of the generation capacity. So as it fits onto the island, it's very different. And the reliability criteria says, assume that a grid, the largest power plant is down for maintenance and the second largest crashes. Do you have enough reserves left? Obviously, the larger the system you have, the more spinning reserves you need. It would be like having a supercomputer. And if in case it crashes, you need another supercomputer. Whereas if you had a bunch of cell phones and one crashed, you would just need another cell phone. And picture if the island has 100 megawatt load for the entire island, and all generators were 100 megawatts in size. Then you would need 4 100 megawatt systems for the big island, because if the load increased to 101 megawatts, you need 2 generators, and a third would be down for maintenance, and a fourth could crash. So you'd have to have 400 megawatts of power to meet your 101 megawatts of load. But if all the power plants were just 5 megawatts in size, 2 of them could be crashed, 2 of them could be down for maintenance, and you'd only need 125 megawatts to handle the entire island's need. So the smaller the systems, the lower capacity you need to hold in reserve, and therefore it would lower the rates for everyone. Another issue is extreme weather events. We know that climate change is causing more and more extreme weather events to occur, and we know we have to be able to sectionalize the grid. That is, right now, if you have one grid and something goes wrong with any part of it, you can knock out the entire grid. But if you are able to sectionalize the grid into islands, then if one part is damaged, all the other parts can survive. The major threat is on cross-island transmission lines. If you look at Hurricane Maria, when it hit Puerto Rico, it went from the southeast to the northwest part of the island, cut diagonally across the island. And the lower part was where the generation was, and the upper part was where the demand was. So it cut the transmission lines between generation and supply. If you look at Hurricane Lane, which came a year later in August of 2018 here in Hawaii, Hurricane Lane was aiming straight at southern Oahu. And if it had maintained its strength for another 24 to 48 hours, it would have devastated Oahu, but it would also have hit directly between the generation on the west side and the demand on the east side. So in order to guard against these extreme weather events, you need to be able to break up the island into pieces and have each piece have enough supply to meet the demand. Putting excess supply in Puna and having excess demand in Kailua Kona would be self-defeating. You need to strengthen the Kailua Kona area. Now, that brings another interesting issue, because one of the problems about geothermal is what I call visibility. When you look at solar panels on rooftops, you can go to any community in the state, any community, and see solar panels on roofs. So solar panels on roofs is very visible and has become very acceptable. Wind, you can see in fewer places, but you can still see it in large places around the islands. Hydroelectric is a little bit less, although when you're passing any stream or river, you sort of sense that it could be a source for hydroelectric. But with geothermal being only located in one small section of the state, it's not really visible for most people. If you were able to expand it to include geothermal in other places around the state, even if they were small systems, 1 megawatt, 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts, you expand the visibility, you get more people to see it, more people to accept it. There are a few other issues that are really important. One of them has to do with ramping. When you have generators like wind and solar that are intermittent and go up and down in output, and you also have demand going up and down, you need firm power sources that can rise and fall with the changing conditions. Gas, for example, natural gas, is very good at ramping up and down to meet changing demands. Geothermal, though, because it has pipes in the ground that are that would be affected by changing loads, the thermal pipes would crack and be damaged. The way geothermal handles ramping is it simply produces the same amount, but wastes some geothermal in order to be able to have a fluctuation. So it's not a good ramping source. Finally, and this is something that has popped up also in Huhonua, generators that go on and stay on all the time have a minimum load requirement. That is, they cannot go down below a certain level in their output, even if there are cheaper alternatives around. So if there's cheaper wind with storage and cheaper solar with storage, but you have to maintain Puna geothermal at a certain level, then you are giving up cheaper sources in order to rely on geothermal. So there are a number of different issues in play. And so to repeat, we're not against geothermal, but we think that when it's used it should be used in other places. Kailua Kona has resources. That would be an ideal place for a second system. Thank you.
Henry, thank you very much for that insightful discussion. Our next speaker is Patrick Kahawaiola. Patrick is a native Hawaiian and a product of the Keakaha homestead. He is an advocate for Native Hawaiians on DHL's trust lands and encourages that those lands be used according to the statutes and provisions of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. Patrick is a U.S. Navy veteran, having served 2 tours in Vietnam, and is retired from the U.S. Postal Service. He is president of Keakaha Community Association. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Aloha mai kakou. My name is Patrick Kahawaiola. Yes, I'm a proud product of the homestead, and I see a couple of your panelists are also. So full disclaimer, myself, Des, are homesteaders, or anyway, we come off that same homestead that raised me, raised him, and gave us the understanding of who we are today as a people. Yes, I am as a product of the homestead. The Hawaiian Home Commission Act can continue to be, after 100 years, a very controversial act. However, it's an act that was created by the United States Congress in 1920 with the help of then Auali'i Prince Jonah Kuhio Kalaniakea Pi'ikoi, who was that then a non-voting member of Congress in the Territorial Congress. And he represented Hawaii quite aptly, he did. But as a non-voting member, I had to, after learning enough about the act, being a product of it, the reason why I was there, was that to say this individual was able to convince. There may have been underlying factors. However, he was a non-voting member of Congress, but was able to convince the rest of the then United States then to provide public lands set aside for, and even those lands are in question based what happened, 27 years prior to that, in 1893, that there was an overthrow of the monarchy, and there's a question still today about the land that whether or not those lands belong to people who say that it belongs to. So the land is really the issue for me, has been that the land is the chief. We're just the people who take care of it. We're the ones who malama the aina. So that puts me in a perspective, for I think a distinct perspective of why the act was created, and it was created to provide, basically was a real basic thing to provide a homesteading program for Native Hawaiians, to provide a home, someplace you can have agriculture, and to include pastoral. So there are three reasons why the act was created, and it was just that, to put Native Hawaiians onto the land, a rehabilitation project. You get on the land, you work the land with your own hands, and you then provide for your family. So, but that has been lost truly over the 100 years of its implementation. And therefore, I consider myself this advocate to be sure that if we stay within the provisions, the statutes of the act, there's only 4 titles to the act. If you stay within those provisions, it should be really a no-brainer. But it becomes very complicated because after statehood, what a lot of people don't realize, yes, the act was created with 50%. You need to have 50% of the blood to reside on those lands. However, that was there because the Congress felt that that's the only way they could prove that we were the people here prior to 1778. That's one of their logic. I don't necessarily agree with it because we are who we are. Our oral history tells us who we are, where we came from, and hopefully what will happen to us in the end. But that being said, to continue on, why the act was created was then to provide some place for Native Hawaiians who were then being disenfranchised from their lands after the territory came in. And Prince Kohil saw fit and had Congress approve the act in 1920. And then that was codified into the statutes of Congress in 1921. So July 9, 1921. But it gives all of us the opportunity. My question, I think I got from what was the nature of the resistance to development, and since we're on the geothermal, I'm going to have to really speak to geothermal by itself in and around Hawaiian homelands. I think maybe a year, maybe 2 years ago, legislation was formed that geothermal, if discovered on Hawaiian homelands, 100% of the assets of the geothermal development would then go to the Department of Hawaiian Homes. That being said, that's a real good time for Native Hawaiians to jump up and down. Except I don't jump too high because the connotation to me was then who was going to be in charge of that asset. Because for 100 years, it has been the territory and the state, and they haven't done really good with taking care of assets for the Department of, for us as the Native Hawaiians. And you can tell that for 100 years, we've got less than 10,000 lessees on the land. 10,000. That's only 1,000 people a year. That's not sustainable. Especially when we have 28,000 people waiting on the wait list to get land. So I fear that that's always going to be in the back of my mind. But the development, yes, there's a natural resistance to any kind of development because change is not an easy thing for anybody to take. However, I have been blessed with kupunas, my elders who have taught me. Those that I have reached out to me have taught me that the only way to perpetuate one's culture is to have change. And it took me a while to having to dig down deep and reflect on those kinds of things. But it makes the best sense for today to try to help other people to understand that change for us to continue to perpetuate our culture, and it was just proven by those exciting voyages that went around the world a couple of years ago on the Malama Honua that proved that we as a native people did sail the world, and or we could, using celestial navigation. And celestial navigation is another form of having to look out into the stars, and that's another bitter case of development that may, in itself, affect the lands having the status of Hawaiian homelands. And that's I'm talking about now what's happening on the mountain at Mauna Kea. People say, well, why worry about it, because that's outside of our realm of sphere of comfort. Well, I believe it isn't, because everything around the mountain is lands having the status of Hawaiian homelands. You can't get to the mountain using the road. That became a big issue with who owns that road. And the processes in there does dictate you need to find out the road is a problem, geothermal can be a problem, but change will happen. And when it does, I am of the premise that it should be that if it has anything to do with Hawaiian homelands, then it should be those that are identified as the native Hawaiians have all the rights to raise their voices for and against about any development, whether it's geothermal, whether it's the TMT, whether it's laws being changed in how we gather. Those are the kinds of things that continues to bother me, but it is what it is, and we just have to get into the process and continue to do it. So it is always for me, it is wonderful to have this opportunity to share my perspective onto on a webinar like this, so people understand that to truly understand that the native Hawaiians are not the special people. We're not special. We always advocate that we're not special. It's the lands that are special. It's our lands, the uses of our lands. How the lands get used makes a big difference, reflects on us who we are as a people. However, fair compensation for the uses of our lands should always be a paramount reason. So again, like I mentioned, so development. I think I heard Speaker Curtis mention that PGV or the geothermal's not hidden, or it is hidden and people don't know about it and don't get to see it. Well, I am from Keoka'a. Our lands were used for the airports. Our lands were used for the sewer plant. Our lands were used for the harbor. And the ramifications of those developments continue till today, 2021. And all of those things happen. We have probably the longest completion of a mile of road that leads into Keoka'a that's been over 4 years in the making. And they can't do a mile. They can't do a mile over 4 years. So yes, we are surrounded, but it is the wherewithal of our community that they continue to work hard and try to do it. But again, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak on behalf of this. Thank you.
Patrick, mahalo for that. There's quite a bit to unpack in what you just shared. And I'm sure that folks may have questions about, essentially the approach we ought to take, right? So there are a number of pieces in there that I think we need to reflect on, and I really appreciate you sharing that. I would like to now bring on Desmon Haumea, a fellow SEH board member. Welcome, Desmon. He is a member of the Royal Order of Kamehameha and the Polynesian Voyaging Society. He has journeyed across the oceans on Hokulea. Kumu A'o Haumea has devoted decades to perpetuating Hawaiian cultural practices and sharing those with succeeding generations. He is also Kumu A'o at Kahawaiola Medical as an indigenous traditional healer, executive chef, and cognitive behavioral therapist, and has traveled the world sharing his music, and he plays with the band Bamboo. Desmon, you're on. Thank you.
O nanai ka hala me ka lehua. He hale lehua no ia na kanoe. O ka uno ia e ano inei. E li ane hoi a ka hiki mai. A hiki mai no oi, me oko, me mako. A hiki pū no me ke aloha. Aloha e, aloha e, aloha e. Aloha kakayaka kako. Good morning. I'm affectionately known as Uncle Des, a very earned title. I'm glad we got to listen to Uncle Pat. I can't wait for Kalaniakea. Also for everybody here, and just mahalo to Sustainable Energy Hawaii for this opportunity. It says Puna perspective. Well, I feel uncomfortable representing Puna, but I'll represent my ohana and my perspective of things that I guess the focus is on geothermal. Like Patrick said, I'm from the homestead. Also grew up all on this East Coast, Hawaii, from Kioka all the way down to Hilinapali. As a child, we enjoyed geothermal. We were always reminded that, oh, how come over here? Oh, it's tutupele. Yeah, we used to surf pohiki. Never have showers, so we used to go in the warm pond, rinse off. Growing up in Kapoho, full of warm ponds. We always go to Manakea Pond or down, what I'm saying, we enjoyed geothermal as we knew it today. Back then, we go warm ponds, rinse off, enjoy, go picnic with the family. I voyaged, I've traveled the world, enjoyed geothermal, Philippines, New Zealand, Europe. Just some background on a cultural view. Speaking with young people too about this, how they're feeling. There was discussion when this first came out. Remember Papa, and it wasn't about against any geothermal or anything like that. It was a concern for la'au lapa'au, identifying the medicinal plants that were located in that area, the wa'ukele. The threat was to lose this medicine, which is important to us today, to understand that even though there's changes, ironically, the la'au lapa'au that Kupuna had before kind of followed these changes, And the concern was to lose this pristine wa'ukele, this pharmaceutical. That was a concern. So what I'm getting at is we viewed, everything we look at through a Hawaiian lens or a cultural lens, is everything here represents what is the kinolau of Kupuna. That's if you look at the trees, the mountain, the ocean, the water, we consider that Kupuna. As a deep sea voyager, I've been in the va'a all my life. We teach our children that the va'a is our kupuna. So we treat this va'a as our own, I'm glad that Pat mentioned about assets. Our own assets is the aina. People ask about, you go to church. See, whenever you go into the ocean, ironically enough, you bless yourself, So we consider the holy water of the oceans and of the land. I was raised to understand that the sky is the roof of our church, the aina is the floor of our church, the mountains is the walls of our church. So we in church in a Western sense, yeah, we in Halepuli every day. Speaking with young people, I think when I asked the question, real simple as of last night, how do you feel about geothermal? Their view was, oh, you disrespecting Tutu Pele. And the reason I mention that is because I felt the same way. Yeah, especially being raised in that area. But for, as an educator, I think what's really occurring is the educational essential to development of things that benefits the people of Hawaii. Like Pat mentioned, and I'm glad he did that. I was going to mention that, but where do these assets fall? Who benefits from these assets? We need to free ourselves from the constraints of the state of Hawaii and return to the kingdom that allows the people to be the beneficiaries of Aina and what that represents. There's lots of feelings, not only Papa, but meaning there's many kupunas who felt that, like the Mauna, the culture was never included in the process. When we are included, it's like $1 late, they shot, yeah, or something like that. We talk about sustainable energy in Hawaii. I think we've forgotten as a whole, the sustainable energy in Hawaii is the people. It's Kapoe o Hawaii, the people of Hawaii with the energy. In 59, we replaced statehood, we replaced agriculture with tourism. And the way that tourism has, I play music. I remember playing at Moana Hotel, where the leader of that hula show felt that, I cannot teach you how to get off that tank. Sorry, my cat. He couldn't bring people in to teach them how to be Samoan. So he would bring in people from Samoa. And what I'm getting at is that, we've been overrun with tourism as an economic relief, and it's not happening. What's been happening is this colonialistic Western mindset of dividing us. And part of that divisional process or this manifest agenda is to brainwash the people of Hawaii for lack of correct education. Had the culture and the people put first into any development, I'm sure we wouldn't be suffering the way our children are suffering today. Lack of medical, correct education. And I see geothermal, later on, especially the last webinar we had, just to be educated in the a more broad sense, and that's the only alternative energy besides the wind, waves. I worked with a group from California College that developed a wave energy making machine to create, to turn the turbines, that whole process. We don't have that here. I've met with people who created the C4 Humanity. It's a machine that creates 250,000 gallons of water, who was supposed to support this integrated medical campus, same as those at the hospital in Naga, Japan. So there's other opportunities for alternative energy, but what we have available right now is, from my understanding, from a science perspective, is there's a lot of sites in the state of Hawaii that has potential geothermal access. I just worried about the assets. I really want to free ourselves. I was like, oh, geothermal is good. We can get electricity. But then all of a sudden, PUC steps in, and all of a sudden, now we got to pay the state again for this free energy. Yeah. That's I mean, if I could use some of those assets for education and medical care, then that would be really, really good for our people. But just to kind of balance the thought or the mindset of geothermal, what's lacking is the understanding of what the process is. And like I said, I was not really in tune to that. But once I followed that webinar with those two college professors or researchers, you know, it's something that we can look at, something that I really don't know, because I don't know really the scientific data, if it should be in Puna or not, listening to Mr. Curtis. But feeling confident that geothermal should be our alternative energy in Hawaii to rid us, you know, right now, currently, again, we're in war, and we're in war again with Ukraine because of natural resources. Nothing more than fossil fuel. And if you've been monitoring every day, you go put gas in the car, you know, fossil fuel is not what this planet needs. Yeah. We just destroying everything that our kupuna in Hawaii or Keakua or whoever this energy producing source that drives our faith forward. And that faith and that trust, we, you know, get people corrupt leading this island nation. You know, so there's lack of trust there. There was lack of trust with geothermal in Puna because people are just not aware. Basically, you know, you cannot come to my house, just walk in the door and help yourself. You need to check with the local residents or whoever you feel that is confident enough with the people to accept, to gain this trust. Yeah. And I think, you know, Kalaniakea is going to talk about the trust we have in the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, the DLNR. You know, DLNR just said that traditional voyaging canoes gotta pay tax now. They gotta apply for mooring. For vessels that brought our kupuna here to these pristine shores and flourished, which was removed, literally removed from our daily lives. And now we're suffering from that statehood. Yeah. So as far as geothermal is concerned, I think it's the only readily available alternative energy, aside from Mr. Curtis saying, you know, solar panels. It costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to build this geothermal, but the energy source is basically free. It's like I had a friend that opened up a water bottling in Kona. It's Japanese. I said, you cannot get free water and go sell them. I had cousins in Tahiti who sold their Tahiti water, filling up with 4 spigots with, remember old style Hawaii used to put the tobacco bag as a filter. Yeah, they had a nice little bottling machine and they were selling water because at that time, as you know, we could drink water from the water hose, right? But they felt, wait, if I'm gonna make money with that. So the abuse of authority and power, I think, is really questionable today. Like the Mauna here, it's not about TNT, it could be KTA up there. But it's about science versus business. And that's what this is. Yeah. It has never been, the business in Hawaii has never been, they use it as a badge or as a banner that this is a cultural entity. When the cultural component is basically stepped over or overlooked and not embraced, it's part of the process. And I think that's what hurts our young people today, is this trust. When I ask these young people, how will, you know, first thing coming up, oh, that's tutupele. In other words, you know, that kauna is you disrespecting kupuna. And if our young people are feeling that, and a lot of people goes, oh, you know, we need this for our future. Well, I think we are delayed dollar short how that goes, because the lack of understanding in the balance of thought. I think that's about enough, I should say. But
yes, thank you.
Yeah, I went over 10 minutes.
Oh, that's perfectly okay. Thank you very much for sharing. Really appreciate that. Our next speaker is Mike Kaleikini. Mike is Senior Director, Hawaii Affairs for Puna Geothermal Venture, Ormat. He is responsible for focusing on the broader aspects of business dev, public and private government affairs in Hawaii. He's also been involved in plant operations administration and currently with business development. Mike is also Commissioner for Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Mike?
Thank you, Noel. And good morning, everyone. Aloha, kako. So I am prepared to share some thoughts and information regarding concerns with geothermal in the area of safety, environmental, and also in engaging community and from the Puna Geothermal Venture perspective. So last week I did provide an overview of PGV, but just briefly, we've been in commercial operation since 1993. And as some folks pointed out, I mean, historically, we have provided an average of 16% or so of the island's energy. But prior to the eruption, we were producing and providing 31%. That was in 2017, and then the 2018 eruption occurred. And of course, we were down for almost 2 years. And then since we've been back, Hawaiian Electric have actually reported for 2021 that the total grid was at about 60% renewable energy. And, we contributed to that. So moving on though, one of the two areas that I was asked to share Manoa on is the safety and environmental concerns with PGV. And so historically, safety and environmental, I just want to come out front and is our top priority here at PGV. Our position is that if we are the safest with regards to personnel, to the equipment, to the environment, with our employees on location, what that translates to is safety to the nearby community and to the entire area. So safety and environmental is definitely number one priority for us, always been, and will continue to be that way. So what are some of the areas of concern that we've heard from communities and from regulators? Because we do have regulatory oversight from the county, we have regulatory oversight from the state, and we also have regulatory oversight from the federal government. So all three government levels. And each and every different government level has different varying requirements that we have to comply with. And this would be something that any potential developer of geothermal future development, if that happens, would most likely have to comply with all of these different regulatory requirements. But one of the things that has been of interest and concern is hydrogen sulfide. So hydrogen sulfide is a gas that's formed by the decomposition of organic matter. So if you have like an animal that died and you get the smell, get the rotten egg smell, that's hydrogen sulfide. And with hydrogen sulfide, it can be dangerous in high concentrations, like most other gases, right? So the geothermal resource does contain hydrogen sulfide, right? So we are regulated by the amount that is emitted to atmosphere. Typically, the entire facility is designed to be a closed loop system, meaning everything that comes up goes back down into the earth, right, to replenish and get heated back up. But to give you folks just an idea of the levels that we need to comply with, on the state side, the Clean Air Branch regulates us for hydrogen sulfide, and we would be non-compliant, subject to a notice of violation if we exceeded 25 parts per billion on an hourly average. Okay, so to put that into perspective, OSHA, Office of Safety, Health, and Administration, allows employees to work in an area up to 8-hour workday in an area that's up to 10,000 parts per billion. Okay, so that's just a reference point there. So what do we do with regards to monitoring and preventing hydrogen sulfide releases? We have monitoring stations that's situated around the perimeter of our facility. It records hydrogen sulfide, it records noise. There's some other MET information that's also been gathered out there: rainfall, wind direction, wind speed, etc. So there's lots of monitoring involved and required by the State Department of Health. So we've had that since the beginning of commercial operation. We'll continue to do that. We also have handheld monitors that we go around with the employees. So from our perspective, we monitor and report anything related to hydrogen sulfide. As soon as we find out if there's any kind of breach in our system, and historically we've had exceedances of 25 parts per billion. I'd say I can count it on a handful, meaning what exceeded 25 parts per billion. The last one was during Hurricane Isel. That was 2014. So actually, I take that back. We weren't in non-compliance because of the concentration, but we're in non-compliance because we had H2S release unabated, and that's a different requirement by the regulators. So that's H2S in general. With eruptions, the gases that we experience as a community, as an island, is sulfur dioxide. So it's a little bit different. Yeah. So sulfur dioxide actually is considered 5 times more hazardous than hydrogen sulfide, just as a point of reference. So from the facility's perspective, other areas of concern is a working fluid that's called pentane. Pentane is a hydrocarbon. We use that as a working fluid. So what that is used for is we transfer the geothermal heat to pentane. Pentane goes from a liquid to a vapor state, and when it's in the vapor state, it has energy to perform work. And so the pentane would then turn a turbine, which is connected to a generator. And the nice thing about pentane is that it has a low boiling point, and it is also in a closed loop cycle. So it goes from liquid to a gas, back cool down to a liquid, and it just continues on. So we have a risk management plan because of the use of pentane. It's flammable. It's related to butane, to propane, and it's very similar to octane. That's what's in our gasoline. Right? So we got that. We also use several industrial chemicals: caustic soda or sodium hydroxide. That's used for the abatement of hydrogen sulfide in the event that we release geothermal steam to the atmosphere. And what that does, it neutralizes the hydrogen sulfide. So we have that, and we use that during upset situations. We also use anti-scalant. Isopropanol is a material that helps to prevent piping from getting clogged, and also helps piping from corrosion and erosion. So we monitor that in our groundwater sampling that we do. That's another program that's required by the state. And we sample the groundwater in our area and look for that constituent. Besides that, we have noise has been another concern. And what we do on that front is we use what is referred to as best available control technology. This is a requirement out of the county geothermal resource permit. And basically it entails like building sound barriers or utilizing materials such as sound attenuating thick blankets. And it also includes a certain way you set up equipment, the direction of the noise generation, so it doesn't point to a community that's like Leilani Estates or Lanipuna. So we usually hire an acoustical engineer to help us optimize and minimizing noise impacts to our surrounding area. Lighting is another one. Of course, the county has a lighting ordinance, but still there's been some concerns about birds at night and bats. And so we use low sodium lighting, and we make sure that everything's facing downwards and not out towards communities. That's the lighting. So, and now to maintain this, so we've been in operation since 1993. So the state has the clean air branch that regulates us for emissions and noise, and that permit is reviewed every 5 years. So that's part of monitoring, making sure that what is being regulated is at its peak performance. Maybe there's new technology that needs to be included. Maybe we need to do something different that has been agreed to previously. So that permit is reviewed every 5 years. Then we also have a permit with the state, um, the Safe Drinking Water Branch, and that's called the Underground Injection Control. That's reviewed every 5 years with the state. And that too is just to monitor what's happening, making sure that we're not contaminating the groundwater, the potential groundwater resource out there. Now, on a federal level, we have a underground injection control requirement, but that permit is for 10 years, right? So those are the main gist of the safety and environmental concerns that we address on a day-to-day basis, 24/7. And there was a study, actually, in general, there was a study that was initiated in 2013 under the Mayor Manoa administration. A third-party consultant came in and put together a working group and to develop what was referred to as the geothermal public health assessment, and that in the end resulted in a lot of information, good information to share, and there were like 8 overarching recommendations, of which several have been completed, but when Mayor Kim administration came in, the continuation of doing the assessment slowed down. So I was actually fortunate enough to go and meet with Mayor Roth to check with him on the county's interest in completing this health assessment. There's probably about 4 or 5 more different recommendations that could be done and should be done, right? And it'll help complete that assessment. It was a working group that was put together. There were 12 members, of which 7 or 8 were from the Puna district, from different various backgrounds. And so I look forward to actually working with Mayor Roth's administration and trying to pick up the pieces and complete that. There's also been there's a survey going on that's referred to as a psychosocial study of geothermal. This was actually originated from a group called Ohana Ho'opakele. So I know I spoke with the doctor who's doing the interviews, and he's spoken with a lot of folks. That should be coming out, I think, maybe sometime this year, at least a draft, if not the completed report. So those are I would say, the overarching safety and environmental concerns. There's also been recent conversation about doing environmental reviews. Yeah, so PGV does have a repowering proposal at the PUC, which entails decommissioning all of this old equipment, replacing it with more modern, more efficient equipment, which would utilize the same amount of geothermal resource, but result in 8 megawatts more. And so there's been interest and concerns that PGV should perform environmental review. And so PGV is actually doing that right now. So we're hopeful that we'll have something here in 2022. That's our anticipated schedule right now. So,
Hello, Mike.
well, let me finish. I hope it's.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I got to talk about community engagement real quick, right? So just for everyone's information, we hold quarterly. This is about community engagement. We have community meetings. It's been virtual, of course, because of COVID. It's quarterly. We've done them more frequently in the past, but we do it quarterly. This past year and a half during COVID, we've averaged about 20 or so participants. It's just been us giving an update of what's going on here. The Hawaiian Electric folks would also provide an update, and the county reps would also participate and talk about recovery in Puna. And so we do have we have a website, and I'll share it in the chat box, or in whatever means to know, and we can share it with all the participants. But it's punageothermalproject.com. It does have information. You can go and look at the link to the monitoring station. So if you want to see what the noise is at a certain location, or H2S, or you can go to those stations. We also have a link in there to a response line. So one of our permits requires that we have a 24/7 response line. If anyone has any concerns or comments or questions, you can call the response line. So there's a link at our website that you can get to the response line. Right. So we participate as a company we really like to focus in the Puna district. We provide scholarships to the high school kids at Poa High School, the Hawaii Academy of Arts and Science, and Ku'okala. So we've also, pre-COVID, of course, would always host tours of the site. I remember one year we averaged like over 100 visitors per month. And we'd love to get the students out here. And as soon as this COVID situation allows it, we're going to reopen that, because we participate in all the science fairs as much as we can, job fairs, just trying to get out there and really do the educational piece, along with the business organizations, some of the different chambers. We provide presentations, and especially something like this, Sustainable Energy Hawaii, which I want to say I really appreciate the opportunity, you guys, and mahalo.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. I'm sure there are other questions that we may be able to get to that are intended for you, so we'll keep moving. So I'd like to now introduce Kalaniakea Wilson. He is a political science PhD candidate at UH Manoa. He owns Hawaii Kingdom Tours. He's a member of Kalapana Mauna Kea Congressional Church that in 2021 passed the Association of Hawaiian and Evangelical Churches resolution at UCC General Synod. He's been a waitlister on the Hawaiian Homestead waitlist for the past 20 years. Kalaniakea.
Aloha vakia kākou. Mahalo ia oko no keia wā no ka ho'oka ike ia oko. O ka mea mua no ku'uhana ma'anei oia ka hokomo ana I ke akua I loko nei no ko kākou kuka ana oia ka mea nui. No leila, e helu ana wau I kahi apana o ka SEH resolution that was passed by the United Church of Christ General Synod this past summer. Therefore, be it resolved that the 33rd General Synod of the United Church of Christ calls upon all settings of the church, denominations, officers, conferences, associations, and congregations to live into the 1993 Apology of the United Church of Christ delivered to the Native Hawaiian people by President Paul Sherry. Be it further resolved that we call upon the United Church of Christ General Counsel's Office to listen to and consider recommendations from the Association of Hawaiian Evangelical Churches, other Native Hawaiian organizations, and Native Hawaiian voices, drafting communications to local, national, and international leaders and organizations calling for compliance with international humanitarian law and an end to the illegal occupation of the Hawaiian Islands. The 33rd General Synod of the United Church of Christ reaffirmed its commitment to stand alongside and in support of the efforts of Native Hawaiians to seek redress and restitution for the war crimes of the U.S. against the Hawaiian Kingdom, including but not limited to the crime of denationalization. I was asked to speak as a waitlister here, but I do more than work with 1920 Hawaiian Homes Commission Act lands. And, Uncle Pat put it right on the money that the major issue here is the unresolved issue that occurred 129 years ago in 1893, Why are we always ignoring to fix that problem? Why do we want to continue developing our Hawaiian lands while ignoring that situation? When the 1920 Hawaiian Homes Commission Act was passed in Congress, it was to address the 1893 humanitarian war crimes that occurred here. But after 100 years, in 2021, there's still 30,000 waitlisters on the wait list. So if you're thinking about putting geothermal on Department of Hawaiian Homelands, just expect 30,000 waitlisters to get arrested before any development takes place. Because what's supposed to happen is the 30,000 on the wait list is supposed to be on the land from over 100 years ago. I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's congressionally approved. It was an obligation placed in the state of Hawaii Constitution for the state of Hawaii to fulfill its obligation in order for them to remain as a state. But still yet, what do? They ignore their obligation to fulfill the Act, 1920 Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which is a rehabilitation act for the 1893 international war crime that was initiated by a state of war by the USS Marines when they arrived on our lands without approval. So as a waitlister who's been waiting for 20 years, I'm all right with getting arrested and stopping further development on Hawaiian homelands. And I'm still waiting for my land after 20 years. Why are you going to make me wait longer? You're just going to anger me, you're going to anger everybody. Just fulfill your obligation. 1993, apology, President Clinton, he says sorry after 100 years, and still they can't fulfill the 1920 Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. It's egregious what has happened here in the Hawaiian Kingdom to Hawaiians, and bringing corporations in, bringing development companies into the Hawaiian Kingdom without addressing this problem that sits under everything when we talk about land or development needs to be resolved first. It needs to be talked about first. When your toilet back up and you cannot flush your toilet, you just let them go for 1 week. No. You plunge them. You make sure your toilet works. Well, this is a problem that's been here for over 129 years. Let's plunge out the blockage. Let's fix the problem. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in a chat for everybody the federal case that just occurred, where pretty much it's already determined that the state of Hawaii and the counties of Hawaii are not able to refute the claims of the Hawaiian Kingdom in the Hawaiian Islands. And this is a federal court case where the state of Hawaii and the counties was kicked out of the court case because they were saying ridiculous things. And it's all documented. Go to this site. You can read everything. It's over a year long, all of the court filings. And pretty much we won again. But the problem is action. There's no action to the restitution and redress from the illegality that occurred over 129 years ago. So that is the most important. But I'm a waitlister, a beneficiary of the Hawaiian Homelands wait list. And after the ballistic missile threat, I thought I was gonna die. I thought my family was gonna die. So I told my friend, who's another fellow waitlister, how are we gonna get on our land? How about let's go build a little hale on Mauna Kea and let's live there. So we did that. We documented all of the traffic for I don't know how many months that was going up and down Mauna Kea Road. And guess what happened before TMT came? 3 o'clock in the morning, Director William Isla and about 40 officers came in early in the morning and they crushed our house. They crushed our house to provide safety for the tourists. That was, see, when you go up to Mauna Kea, you're at 6,000. The next stop is 9,000. People take babies up there without any explanation that, hey, your baby's gonna be in 9,000 foot elevation. You know, it might be a good idea not to take your baby up there. You know, we saved many lives, but DHHL, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, seems to always ignore their obligation, which is number one, put Hawaiians on the land from 1920. So until that occurs, you're gonna see 30,000 Hawaiians ready to obstruct, ready to get arrested, to stop any kind of development on Hawaiian homelands until all of the waitlisters are on the land immediately. 100 years is too long already for a congressional act not to be fulfilled. Mahalo. Thank you guys very much. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you very much for that. You know, what you just shared just highlights some, I guess I'd like to deviate a little bit from the agenda here, just highlights the importance of really understanding some of the underlying concerns, right? And concerns is putting it lightly, that have been long, not maybe misunderstood, but just not addressed. And the need for us to get those things front and center as we strive towards making some of these changes that might be required moving forward. So thanks very much for raising that. Last but not least, we have Doug Adams. Doug is director of the County of Hawaii Research and Development Group. He is a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, West Point graduate, and an attorney. He is active in several nonprofits and public sector organizations across the island, and he's vice chair of W.H. Shipman Limited. Doug?
Thanks, Noel. And I'd also like to thank all of our speakers today, Henry, Uncle Pat, Kau Des, Mike, and Kau Kalaniakea. Also, thanks to you and Sustainable Energy Hawaii for hosting today's and the panel 2 weeks ago, and then also to everyone who's attending today and listening to these really meaningful and inspirational conversations and dialogues. You gave me an easy task. You told me just to talk about the obstacles and barriers associated with trying to move geothermal resources forward in on the Big Island. I did want to read something from our mayor. So just briefly, all of you recognize that we in the County of Hawaii are looking forward to economic development and feel that we have great potential here on the Big Island in terms of expanding our economic base. One of the areas, of course, is energy self-sufficiency, which we feel is a significant part of our economic base. As you know, we are moving very rapidly toward that particular goal, and one of the most outstanding possibilities of energy self-sufficiency is that of geothermal energy. I mentioned that was from the mayor. I didn't say which one. That was Mayor Herbert Matayoshi in 1977 at a 2-day seminar that was being held in the context of oil prices and petroleum expenses just skyrocketing as a result of what OPEC was doing in the 70s. As I was preparing for this particular, and I'll be brief actually, because I think the questions will be more important than what I have to say. But as I was preparing for this, I wanted to take a look at where we were in terms of context. Obviously, that was one of the documents that the proceedings associated with that particular seminar. We also have had, as Mike talked about, the geothermal public health assessment and the continuation potentially of that was run by Peter Adler at Mayor Billy Kanoi's request. And then we, of course, have the general plan for the county, DLNR and Department of Health, but the DLNR chapter in our HRS, as well as the Department of Energy's GeoVision, which talks about geothermal resources and opportunities. And then finally, a geothermal working group report that actually came out of our legislature in 2012. It was based on a Senate continuing resolution of 2010. It was to take a look at the opportunities associated with using geothermal as an energy source to try and move us away from petroleum and the impacts of petroleum. So you asked me to take a look at barriers and obstacles, but for me, they actually turn out to be more realities, right? And so a good number of these we've talked about. Our regulatory rubric, both federal, state, and county, the environmental and geological issues that we have. We've heard about our social and cultural and political issues, of course, land use, economic, and transportation being another of these that are associated with this. Clearly, the categories that we have been working on, public safety and health, the idea that energy itself is a common good, and what we can, and part of the reason for our regulatory rubric is because it is a common good and not something necessarily that the market by itself can manage. And then, of course, our environmental concerns, making sure as we learn more about this particular industry, meaning geothermal energy, then what does that mean for us in our environmental concerns? And it's not just subsurface water, it's the flora and fauna, it's medicinal plants that we heard about today. All of those become part of the conversation. There are industrial issues, right? This is an industry, and those kinds of things are part of what we have to take into consideration as we look forward to this. And then this is not something that is done in a vacuum, right? It is done in the context of what are we doing right now for energy, and what are some of the other alternatives that we have as well. So these are all part of that those considerations. We've talked about hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide noise. The variety of issues have been addressed or at least discussed. So I won't necessarily go into all of those so that we can get to the questions. And then finally, the stuff that isn't talked about or hasn't been necessarily, but is part of clearly Mike's world, and it has to do with what are the technical impediments. Let's say we all agree that this is important, right? The exploration and drilling time, the lead time associated with starting something and getting it actually up and running, 4 to 8 or more years associated with that. Financing these things, the permitting, which of course is never a problem in this county. Permitting is never a problem. And then, the transmission piece of this. We haven't even talked really about any of those particular real issues specifically. And then near and dear to me is workforce development, because part of what we have to think about is, one, if we go down this route, looking at alternative energy means to try and replace our dependence on fossil fuels in places like Russia and the Ukraine and Iran that are providing our fuel to this island. How are we going to do that? Are we going to make sure that we have the folks here that are trained to be involved in that? So workforce development, retraining, reskilling, all key to make sure that we are providing opportunities for our people here as well. So I'll drop there because I think that there's a lot of questions that people would like to actually hear from other speakers on. But obviously, at the end of the day, for me, all of these things can be handled. There's a number of countries that receive 15% or more of their electricity from geothermal. We know about Iceland and New Zealand, but Costa Rica is another one. El Salvador is another one. The Philippines and Kenya are 2 more. These are countries that have figured out how to move forward with the appropriate level of environmental concern, governmental regulation, so that they can try and wean themselves off of petrochemicals as their primary means of providing energy source. That's something that we need to do here as well. And I'll leave it to that.
Doug, thank you. Thank you very much for that. It was a good recap. And also a reminder that there's so much more to uncover in this discovery, in this journey of discovery. And this is certainly not going to be the last event, and it's not going to be the only event type. I anticipate, based on what we heard today, and also the discussion in the chat, that we need to have conversations with our community members, right? With different parts of our community to ensure that we are able to listen and understand the concerns and ensure that we're able to address them. So I'd like to now transition us to our Q&A. And then maybe I'll start off by just asking, like, we all heard, what was presented perhaps for the first time. And I'm wondering if there are any curiosities, questions that you might have of each other or for each other. Henry.
I noticed the last speaker talked about all the places around the world that have large amounts of geothermal, but only one country, and that country is in Africa, has ever gone above 1/3 of its power from geothermal. So is there an upper limit for how much geothermal can exist in Hawaii?
Yeah, thanks, Henry. Actually, Iceland gets 80% of its energy from geothermal. So they have discovered that is not there isn't an upper limit for them. What they have done, though, and it's fair to say, is that they're not using all of their geothermal for electricity, right? It's not for a grid, because they don't have enough people that they would have the demand for that. So they use a considerable amount for aluminum production. So they are an aluminum exporter to the world, and they are using their geothermal resource to provide green energy to support that industry.
I agree. I meant electricity. As you know, Iceland uses hydroelectric for 75% of its electricity.
The idea that there is an upper limit is probably associated with demand, but I think the question that you raise is, are there other activities that can be used with the geothermal resources that we have here? And I think the answer is potentially yes.
Thank you, Henry. Does anyone on our panel have questions for other panelists? Any other? Okay. So I'm going to go through a few questions, and do feel free to speak up, if something does come up. This one I think is for you, Mike. There are people in the community that are convinced that many health problems and earthquakes are being caused by PGV. The claim is that fracking is going on and causing the earthquakes. Can you comment on that?
Right. So we're familiar with that. Number one, we do not frack. For our technology, we look for natural fractures in the formation, right? Three key elements for geothermal is heat, water, and permeability, or the natural fractures that's down there. So we do not frack as what folks are familiar with in North America with regards, to gas and oil. And with regards to the earthquakes, so I can share some information. It had to do with our renewal of our underground injection control permit with the US EPA, and it does address the earthquakes, but we have no factual information that our reinjection has any kind of effects on the earthquakes out here. We monitor for earthquakes, seismic activity. That's one of the techniques used in oil and gas and geothermal to locate where resources are. So we've had a seismic array, and we plan to update that just to monitor what goes on in the area surrounding us.
Thank you, Mike.
Noel, may I make a quick comment on that as well?
Yes, please.
Yeah, and recently the U.S. Geologic Survey here on the island also completed a survey and a report that specifically looked at the impact of the geothermal activity on the seismic activity in the rift zone. And being scientists, they don't say definitively, right, because they can't. But what they did say is that they found no evidence that, in fact, the activity there was responsible for any of the seismic activity.
Thank you, Doug. I have a question here, and it could be for Patrick or Kalaniakea or maybe Uncle Des. Is there a situation where Hawaiian homelands having ownership over geothermal resources would be acceptable?
I'll try that. No, I don't believe it would be. If I take the questionnaires' comments, correct me if I'm wrong. Acceptable. I do not believe anything that could create a so-called cultural degradation of our Aina. However, the acceptability would come for me is in the devil's in the details in what will benefit the native Hawaiians that are attached to that lands. And if the benefit is it, and because right now we're being bombarded by state legislature about accepting the fact that maybe gambling, casino gambling is a good thing on Hawaiian homelands. That can help to affect us. You can put geothermal in the same vein. That will it be acceptable? I think it'll be for the greater Native Hawaiian population to make that decision, not legislatively by people in the industry or corporations or legislators, but then the people need to make that. And when I say the people, and those are those that are identified as being the native Hawaiians. But you want to talk about our trust lands, it should be only those people who attach to the trust lands are able to make those decisions. So acceptability, I think it can be if the benefits are such that the conditions of the native Hawaiians will be better. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to add to that?
I'll add I stated it earlier, the trust, we've lost trust in our system. As shared by Kalaniakea, by Uncle Pat, there's no trust. I mean, our own family is selling out, I don't trust the state, federal, county when they come with findings of research. They're hired in-house. There's no independent surveys or research done, or no regulation over these. I believe a Kanaka Maoli operated business enterprise should be the po'o of any development of any land, so that the Hawaiian culture is not utilized as a token badge for opportunities for foreign investors to come in and just buy out legislation so we can so they can further pad their portfolios. There's no regulations. We read about it, we have the regulatory, might talk about it, that's great. But what's regulating the regulators? Like Kalaniakea said, there's an obligation on the table. We can, take, example, I work with the New Zealand government. They control their geothermal. They get direct revenue from their land. And that's what Pat was talking about, the assets. We talk about energy, sustainable. I said, we the energy. The people of Hawaii is the energy. Without the people of Hawaii, like our Native American Indians, they've removed that identity. But what's happening now is this return to what my tutor always said, we're going to return to the malo. Which means the traditional the traditions of our ancestors. We cannot go to war with a military presence so huge that they can go make wars with other people. The war within us, because of colonialistic mindset and this state of Hawaii run administration, they've divided our thoughts, so the education is lacking. Because we all have all these things that comes in, and even after the release of the 2006 Judd files, the truth is finally there that Kalaniakea took it to another level, because nobody talk about our our Hawaiian churches, where they're stealing land from our Hawaiian churches for development, for foreign investors. Because we have here, we have this development research and we have all these regulations and people doing research, but it's not for the benefit of Hawaii. It's for the benefit of financial portfolios. I don't know who's involved in there. And I think that's the answer to that. I think Hawaiian business control, I don't know what the correct verbiage is for that. But like Pat said, I mean, you come to our lands. I mean, we lived through all of that. And it's still happening today. You know, the issues that we, you know, our landfill system, our sewage system, you know, when that fails, who suffers from that? The Hawaiians suffer from that. Right there in our fishing grounds, Puhi. You know, I remember years ago standing at the airport, they divided our community because they wanted to extend the airport. I don't know if it's good or bad, but to me, that's you know. So in answer to that, I think we need more Kanaka oversight, if that's correct in verbiage.
Thank you, Uncle Des. Kalaniakea, did you want to comment on that, or did you?
Yeah, just a little bit. I think when we look at Department of Hawaiian Homelands, it's a state agency. It's not the beneficiaries. Yeah, DHHL tends to quiet and silence the beneficiaries. Hawaiian Trust lands from the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act is designated for the beneficiaries, not a state agency. The state agency's only obligation is to put Hawaiians on the land. So we are supposed to be the ones to facilitate geothermal, if there is ever going to be a geothermal or any type of development, not the state agency DHHL on the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act lands. That's all I wanted to make clear. Mahalo.
Thank you. Thank you. Where I just announced that although we're over time now, I think it's important for us to ensure that we address any of the other questions that have been raised that are especially complex. So if and for those of us who need to leave, you know, I appreciate your participation. We'll get the recording out to everybody who's registered. I want to raise a question regarding regulatory oversight. This has been raised a couple of times in the Q&A. And I'm just going to try to summarize this. Can we comment on the concerns related to regulatory oversight? How robust is our regulatory oversight in protecting the environment? So that's sort of the theme of the question. And I'll leave that to anyone who has insight into how to address this.
I'll take a stab, and I'm pretty sure Mike will have some comments on this. And we're likely not to be aligned. I think that governmentally, we're not as, so let me talk federal, state, and county. So federally, the EPA is a pretty strong entity, and they do a pretty good job, much to the chagrin of industries in the energy sector, not just geothermal, in regulating and providing oversight of the activities that are ongoing. At the state level, I think that in our Department of Health and in our Department of Land and Natural Resources, they would tell you that they don't have enough people necessarily to conduct oversight to the degree that that the HRS and probably the regulations require. They don't have the inspectors necessarily to cross, and so I would say that that would be an issue. And then at the county, despite the fact that we have 3,000 employees in the county, we always feel like we are not necessarily staffed to be able to provide the level of regulatory oversight that we would like to be able to provide. We know that permitting is a big issue. That's not just a staffing issue; it's also a process issue. But there is still some elements of not having it, both the numbers as well as the educational component in our inspection pool. So, so that would be my comments on that.
Just briefly. So this particular concern is not new for us. There's been folks stating that, hey, it's not right that there's insufficient regulatory oversight because PGV is required to self-report, right? And so it does come down to the operators and the facility folks really being stewards of what they do, because I tell people I'm not going to hide anything illegal. I mean, if we get audited and we did something intentional that's non-compliant, I'm subject to be put away in prison, right? And Doug mentioned about staffing. So most industrial facilities have to comply with self-reporting, right? Because it's true, DOH can't send a person to PGV, to the HELCO plants, to monitor emissions, to monitor noise every single day for the entire operation. So there is a degree of trust that regulators have to share and with facilities. And so that's a long-standing concern about whether regulatory oversight is sufficient or not.
However,
facilities. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
PGV could have more monitoring systems for air toxics releases and have them connected to the web so people could see what was going on with or without regulators.
Yeah, and we have the stations that are out there. You can go to our website and there's a link to look at the data.
If you want
Michael,
to eat
I
healthy
think
and feel
you
your
shared
best,
that, right? That there was a website. Did you put that link in the chat? Is that something that? So what we'll do in the report is share the link to that for it sounds like real-time access to the data. Peter, are there any other questions that I should tackle here? Okay.
I just put one in from Nicole Outse, which was supposed to be directed towards Kalaniakea, I believe it was. I'm looking right now.
Okay, I have the question. I'll read this.
Okay, great.
And okay. So with apologies for my, I'm just quoting Dr. Lauti. With apologies for my ignorance, what is the hang up on getting more Hawaiians onto DHHL? Where's the money supposed to come from?
There's actually,
If you don't mind. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Kalani. Go ahead.
Kalama, you go first, Uncle Pat. I'll go after you. You did more work than me. You go.
I appreciate that. That question, Doctor, that's the $64,000 question. And it's alarming. It's very alarming when this year's legislature, in its opening ceremonies, where the Speaker of the House says that the state of Hawaii has pledged $600 million to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. That's became for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, everything to do with this, the $600 million pledge to do it. And I find out that to be as it was expressed, because I wanted to know where this money was all this time then. Well, it's obviously during COVID, they don't mention anything about the CARES money, but they did say it's surplus money that the state of Hawaii has. So they're dumping $600 million. I would challenge anyone here, if you're non-Hawaiian, is to ask the state and its budget and finance, or even the Department of Hawaiian Homes, What's in the detail? Who's going to get it? It says very generically, it's going to be able to put people on the land and give them a home. You know, that's basically what it says. Well, first, we need to get the land. Again, I told you, it is the land that's important. If you take that $600 million and take the 28,000 people off the list, or whatever that number is, it fluctuates, but it's 28,000 right now. So let us put the people on the land. So for me, Doctor, it is the devil's in the details. That's how you do it. There's an opportunity to do it. They should have been doing it since 1959, and it hasn't happened. We've had lawsuits in the Nelson case that talks about sufficiently funding the department, and that went to the Supreme Court to argue that. So there is a 600 million. I just want to remind those that are here that $600 million settlement was given to the Department of Hawaiian Homes in 1993. A $600 million settlement was given to the Department of Hawaiian Homes for the illegal use of their lands during the territory. What that created was a debacle statewide. They created a turnkey home, hey, just all these homes built all over the state with substandard equipment, that homes are still feeling, beneficiaries are still feeling the effects of it. So it is very hard, I think, as Desmond mentioned, for us to trust, to have this trust, the broken trust about KS trustees. It permeated from what was the mistrust in the Department of Hawaiian Homes and how it was created. I just want to keep reminding people, we're the only entity that's mentioned in statehood as a provision of statehood in the Admissions Act. It clearly tells all of us, Native Hawaiians included, the state and its people will take care of the Hawaiian race. And they were given the Hawaiian Home Commission Act to manage. That's all. So it is, you can flush as much money as you want. It's never going to happen until those statutory things are aligned and our people, it's hard to say, to get what they deserve. It's not an entitlement, it's our birthright. It was to resolve an issue that happened in 1893. That has never been resolved. But to answer your question, there's $600 million coming down the pike. I'll be sitting there on the table trying to find out how that's going to be dispersed. So the devils are going to be in the details, and let's see if it goes. Thank you very much for that question.
Thank you.
So I call government corruption at its finest. It has continued here since 1959 when they created the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. The Department of Hawaiian Homelands is a state agency. So they move the money from one pocket to the other pocket only to feed themselves. We've asked for a forensic audit, I don't know how many times, but continued government corruption through the Department of Hawaiian Homelands steals money from the beneficiaries. To me, that's the number one reason why there's 28,000 on the current wait list. So we need to weed out the government corruption, and we need to put the 28,000 on the list on the land. But there's really no holdup, because after the ballistic missile threat, myself and many beneficiaries, we put up a home on Hawaiian Homelands. Police came, they couldn't arrest us because we followed the act. But guess who comes to crush our home? Director of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, William Ayla. He came and he crushed our home with officers from DLNR and county police. So that's the problem. It's the state of Hawaii government doesn't want to release our lands to the beneficiaries. It's really that simple. And when we do put homes on it, they come 3 o'clock in the morning and they smash it and they steal everything. So that's the holdup. Government corruption at its finest.
There is clearly so much more to discuss here, and perhaps this isn't the only forum that we need to have this conversation in. I want to thank. I want to start wrapping us up because we're over time. This was a really amazing event. I'm really honored that we had your presence here and that you were able to share what you shared. I hope that it came across as diverse perspectives that will allow us to better understand the different angles that we need to address. So thank you very much to our speakers for taking time to share these really important perspectives. This, I think, has contributed to our collective knowledge. And I want to say that SEH will create space for additional discussion on this topic in future webinars, as well as community discussions. So be on the lookout for announcements. If you would like to contact us directly, would like to share additional information, ask questions, make suggestions, you can find us at sustainableenergyhawaii.org. And I will share my screen here with the information. So with that, I think we can conclude. Again, thank you very much, everyone, for your time and for staying beyond as well. I know that we went beyond a few minutes here. So thanks again, and enjoy your weekend, and look forward to additional conversations about this very important topic in the near future. Aloha, everybody.